The guards dragged Captain Sophia reins across the mud of the prison yard, their laughter echoing in the cold night air. They treated her like nothing more than another fallen soldier, another piece of prey for their endless war. What they could not see was the iron resolve in her eyes, or the years of training that had carved her into one of the sharpest blades in the sky. Sophia was 31 years old, born in the rugged lands of Montana, where winds howled across open fields and the horizon always seemed to stretch a little farther. Her father had once been a decorated aviator, and from him she learned that flying was not only about skill with the controls, it was about vision, about understanding the sky as a three-dimensional battlefield where every second mattered and hesitation could end a life. By the time she entered the service, Sophia had already logged hundreds of hours in training aircraft. Her instructors noticed quickly that she processed tactical puzzles faster than most. She could improvise solutions where others froze. Her combat simulations showed a gift for staying calm under crushing pressure. She could analyze a battlefield as if she were outside it, watching pieces move on a board, then dive into the chaos with bold decisions. Her call sign Falcon had been earned during her second deployment in the Middle East. She had flown into enemy territory alone, where a group of Allied soldiers were held captive. Her strikes were precise and merciless, her maneuvers so sharp that the enemy began whispering about the bird of prey that struck from above, vanishing into the clouds before they could respond. That reputation clung to her and gave her comrades hope whenever her rotor blades thundered overhead. 7 years of deployments shaped her into one of the most versatile aviators in the service. She flew assault missions, escort runs, and precision raids, tallying more than 300 combat sorties. She pushed her aircraft beyond the limits described in manuals, developing new ways to mask her presence in terrain and deliver weapons with surgical accuracy. Other pilots studied her tactics, and instructors began folding them into training doctrine. What separated Sophia from many was her grounding in engineering. She did not simply fly. She understood the machines themselves. She knew the strain on rotor blades, the hidden potential of engines, the way certain atmospheric conditions could shift performance. This gave her an edge, turning her into a pilot who could squeeze every ounce of capability from her helicopter while adapting to emergencies others could not solve. But no knowledge could prevent the disaster that unfolded on a gray morning deep over hostile ground. She and her co-pilot, Lieutenant Michael Carter, were flying reconnaissance along suspected supply routes. Reports had suggested minimal air defenses, but those reports were wrong. The enemy had been studying American tactics, waiting patiently. Then they revealed their trap surface to air missiles screamed upward, overwhelming the countermeasures. Sophia launched. The first blast ripped into the tail section, the second shredded the rotor system. Michael cried out, but the fire and shrapnel ended his life before Sophia could even turn her head. Flames clawed at the cockpit as warning alarms wailed. Her hands, moved by instinct, fighting to keep control despite the blood soaking her sleeve. She guided the crippled bird into auto-rotation, trading altitude for a fighting chance to survive. The helicopter hit the ground hard, throwing dirt skyward, but Sophia lived. Bruised, bleeding, yet breathing. Within minutes, enemy troops swarmed the clearing. They valued an American pilot alive more than any weapon. She drew her sidearm, fired until the magazine clicked empty, but numbers crushed her resistance. Her wrists were bound, her body shoved toward the waiting trucks. Her last sight of the smoking helicopter was like watching her wings torn away. The prison where they delivered her was buried in a mountain forest. The compound was surrounded by cliffs and hidden defenses that made rescue improbable. Its commander, a man named Viktor Malenkov, had spent decades mastering psychological pressure. He did not rely only on pain. He used deprivation, confusion, relentless questions meant to break the spirit and harvest secrets from the mind. He believed Sophia would fold like so many before her. But Victor underestimated her. He saw only a weary pilot limping from wounds. He did not see the silent calculations behind her steel-gray gaze. From the first interrogation, she gave only her name, her rank, and her number. Every pause, every glance at the guards, every observation of the lights and generators and wires around the camp fed her memory. She was building a map not only of the prison walls, but of its weaknesses. For 3 days she endured. They thought she was broken by exhaustion. but she was studying listening to the whine of helicopters overhead. She identified their model, their flight paths, their habits. She watched the guards change shifts and memorized their laziness. She inspected the food brought to her and traced where it had been prepared and how the supply lines flowed. She was not a defeated prisoner. She was a predator waiting for the right moment. The enemy believed the forest would swallow her if she tried to flee, that the mountains themselves were her cage. But Sophia knew different. She had been raised in wild country, taught to navigate with stars and sun, trained to think of terrain not as obstacle, but as ally. And unlike the others, she carried a vision no one else had. She did not dream of running on foot. Until hunted down, she dreamed of taking back the sky itself. Her chance came when whispers reached her about another plan. A small group of captured Special Forces soldiers led by Sergeant Robert Hayes were preparing to strike at the guards during a shift change. They meant to vanish into the trees and march toward freedom. Robert was tough, resourceful, the kind of man who could lead comrades through impossible terrain, but he had not accounted for the eyes in the sky, the helicopters that would hunt them with sensors, dogs, and firepower. Sophia listened, considered, then spoke quietly. When she and Robert could exchange a few words, the forest would not save them, the mountains would not shelter them. The only way out was upward. She proposed something reckless, something almost unthinkable. She suggested stealing the very helicopter the enemy used to watch them. At first, Robert stared as if she had lost her mind, but the more she explained, the more he saw the spark of possibility. Her engineering mind had dissected the enemy aircraft for days. She knew their routines, their landing patterns, their weaknesses. Her conviction carried weight, and the others began to believe. The plan was no longer about running. It was about striking, taking the machine of their captors and turning it into the blade of their freedom. The night air in the prison camp was heavy with the scent of damp earth, and would smoke. The mountains around them seemed to press inward like walls of shadow. The guards believed these cliffs and forests were their greatest allies, but to Sophia, they were potential tools waiting to be understood. She had endured 3 long days within this compound, enough time to build a mental picture of its rhythms and cracks. Every guard carried himself with false confidence. They believed their numbers and their walls were unbreakable. Yet in their arrogance, they revealed patterns. Some grew careless after dark, leaning on rifles instead of scanning their posts. Some fell into predictable habits, sharing smuggled cigarettes during shift change. The watchtowers flickered with uneven power as the generators sputtered at intervals. Sophia noted each weakness, storing it like ammunition in her mind. Sergeant Robert Hayes, the leader of the captive Special Forces soldiers, had been quietly preparing his own plan. His men had scraped tools from scraps hidden away, small blades cut from metal wire locks studied for weaknesses they intended to move when the guards grew tired in the late hours, slip into the forest, and trust their survival skills to carry them through the wilderness. For most soldiers, such a plan made sense, but Sophia had been a pilot too long to forget the sky. She warned Robert in hushed tones that the enemy would release their helicopters within hours of any breakout. Thermal imaging, dogs, electronic trackers, all would be unleashed. Running on foot would mean eventual capture. Perhaps they would last a day, perhaps 2, but the end would be the same. Their only hope was boldness, not stealth, to seize the very machines meant to hunt them and turn them against their masters. At first, Robert shook his head. His mind was trained on ground tactics. His instinct screamed that Sophia's idea was madness. But as she described the flight patterns, she had memorized the mechanical details. She had pieced together from overheard maintenance chatter. The possibility grew sharper. She was not simply guessing. She was calculating with the mind of someone who had lived in cockpits for half her life. The other prisoners listened as well. Some were skeptical, some desperate. One man whispered that trying to capture a helicopter was suicide, but others leaned forward, drawn by Sophia's calm certainty. She spoke not with wild hope, but with the grounded tone of an engineer and a warrior who had measured risks 1,000 times before. She explained how patrol craft landed near the camp each evening to refuel and coordinate with ground forces. For a few precious minutes, the helicopter sat vulnerable, guarded only by crews who never expected prisoners to strike. That was their window. The choice fell to Robert as the ranking soldier. He studied Sophia's wounded arm, the dirt streaked across her face, the intensity in her eyes. Finally, he nodded, his voice low and certain. If they were to die, better to die fighting with a chance than running with none. The group agreed their escape would not be silent, but thunderous. The day that followed stretched endlessly. The guards paraded prisoners through labored details, chopping wood, carrying supplies, repairing fences. Sophia feigned fatigue, allowing herself to be underestimated each moment. She studied the terrain between the prison wall and the helicopter pad, measuring distances in her mind, calculating how quickly her group could cross. She whispered small instructions to her fellow captives: hide a shard of metal here, pass along a strip of cloth there. The prisoners became an orchestra tuning for the storm. By sunset, tension hummed through the group. The mountains glowed with fading light as shadows pooled across the camp. Guards shuffled into their new positions, yawning, stretching, careless in their routine. Sophia crouched with Robert and the others, their bodies pressed low to the ground, waiting for the signal. The low thrum of rotor blades arrived on schedule. Vibrations trembled through the soil as the enemy helicopter swept across the treetops, then descended toward its landing zone. Sophia's heart hammered with a rhythm she knew too well. That sound had always meant strength and dominance. When she flew her own aircraft now, it was both threat and opportunity. The helicopter settled in a place, dust swirling around it. The crew disembarked, stretching legs, talking among themselves, weapons slung casually over shoulders, as if no danger existed here. Guards at the perimeter waved lazily, distracted by routine. Robert glanced at Sophia. She gave the faintest nod. The moment had come. Like shadows breaking free, the prisoners moved. Knives flashed in silence. Throats gripped before cries could escape. Fists struck helmets with precise fury. Robert's men dismantled the first line of guards, while Sophia darted forward toward the machine she had studied for days. Her fingers brushed the cold metal of its fuselage, and in that instant she felt as though her wings had been returned. Chaos erupted as alarms screamed through the camp. Lights flared harsh against the night. Guards scrambled to respond, but the prisoners had momentum born of desperation and defiance. Sophia climbed into the cockpit, her hands moving across unfamiliar switches. She could not read the language etched into the controls, yet her engineering knowledge filled the gaps. Flight principles were universal. She had always believed that, and now she would prove it. Outside, Robert shouted commands, rallying prisoners into the aircraft. Shots rang out, echoing across the compound. Guards fell, others fled, confused by the audacity of the attack. Within minutes, a dozen captives crammed into the helicopter, their faces pale, but burning with sudden hope. Sophia's breath came hard as she forced the machine to life. The rotor blades groaned, then spun faster, until the roar filled the valley. The ground trembled under the power that belonged to her. Once more, enemy soldiers poured toward the landing zone, shouting orders, firing blindly. Yet the helicopter began to lift, pulling free from the earth, as if answering Sophia's unspoken command. Through the canopy, she saw the prison commander, Viktor Malenkov, emerge, his face twisted in disbelief. He had thought her broken, defeated, merely another prisoner to exploit. Now he watched as his own weapon rose into the night sky. Under her control, the fury in his eyes was powerless against the storm she carried. The helicopter climbed above the prison walls, and the prisoners inside erupted into shouts of triumph. For the first time in weeks, they breathed freedom. The compound that had seemed an unbreakable cage shrank below them, lights flickering uselessly against the darkness. Sophia tightened her grip on the controls, her voice steady as iron. This was not escape alone. This was the beginning of vengeance. The camp that had broken so many souls was about to face the wrath of those it had tried to contain, and the sky itself would become their ally. The helicopter lifted higher, its engines howling across the valley. As if it too hungered for freedom, Sophia kept her eyes fixed on the instruments, her fingers moving instinctively across controls. Though the language was foreign, the design was not. She had flown countless hours in aircraft built on the same principles: lift, thrust, stability, balance, and she would master this one as if it were her own. Below, chaos rippled through the camp. Alarms shrieked in panicked rhythm. Guards stumbled in a firing line, spraying bullets wildly into the night. Their rounds sparked harmlessly against armored plating. The prisoners inside roared with a defiant energy that grew stronger with every second they climbed away from the earth. The sound of victory pulsed in their veins. Robert leaned close, steadying himself against the vibration. He spoke with urgency. They would chase us, he warned. They would scramble. Every machine within range. Sophia already knew. Her eyes narrowed As she scanned the horizon, the sky was no longer empty. She had heard the chatter of patrol schedules. She knew reinforcements would come. But she was not thinking only of escape. She thought of the tower lights, the wire fences, the watch posts, where prisoners still shivered in their cells. She thought of the smirk on Viktor Malenkov's face as he dismissed her. As broken for days, he had believed she was caged, but now she was the hawk circling above his walls. She had not come this far merely to flee. She intended to strike. Robert caught the fire in her gaze. He asked what she planned. Sophia answered with calm certainty. They would not simply vanish in the forest. They would use the stolen machine to cripple the camp itself. A blow so fierce it would shake their captors into fear. Forever the other prisoners fell silent, listening. They had expected only to run and hide. Now she was offering something more than survival. She was offering justice. The helicopter banked sharply and dove back toward the prison grounds. The sudden maneuver threw the prisoners against their harnesses. Some gasped in shock. But Sophia's hands were steady. Her body knew the physics of the dive. She leveled out low over the treetops, using the terrain to mask their approach. The camp loomed ahead, searchlights slashing through the darkness, trying to locate them, but never expecting an attack from their own aircraft. The first strike came swift and merciless. Sophia loosed the helicopter's rockets at a guard tower. The explosion lit the night in a blinding flash. Wood and steel erupted into shards, raining down on soldiers who scattered in terror. The tower collapsed in flame, and with it the illusion of safety that had cloaked the prison for years. The roar of the blast rolled across the mountains, and prisoners still trapped inside the compound cried out with hope. She swung the helicopter in a wide arc and unleashed the guns across the perimeter walls. Fences sparked and folded under the storm. The enemy scrambled in confusion, shooting at shadows, unable to accept that their own weapon had turned against them. Robert coordinated from the cabin, scanning targets and relaying where guards clustered. He shouted above the thunder, pointing out communication posts, fuel stores, and defensive nests. Sophia struck each with ruthless precision. Inside the camp, Viktor Malenkov raged. His command structure disintegrated in minutes. His men cried out in disbelief. Some refused orders, their morale shattered. How could they defend against their own machines? When he bellowed commands in the radio, all he heard in return was panic. The voice of his captor turned predator filled the same frequency, calm, steady, unshaken. She told him that capturing a pilot was his last mistake. The prisoners inside the helicopter stared at Sophia in awe. Some clutched their wounds, some whispered prayers. All of them now believed they were no longer prey. They were warriors soaring on wings of vengeance. Sophia's strikes were surgical. She avoided buildings that might still hold prisoners. Her engineering mind calculated angles of fire, ensuring destruction fell only where it was meant. Guard barracks erupted, communication antennas splintered, fuel reserves ignited with rolling flames that painted the night sky red and orange. The prison that had once seemed untouchable crumbled piece by piece. The enemy tried to mount a defense. A second helicopter scrambled from a nearby outpost, racing toward the chaos. But Sophia anticipated it. She had studied their patrol paths long enough to know the direction and altitude they favored. She guided her craft into a position of advantage, hugging the mountainside, until the pursuing helicopter appeared in silhouette against the moonlight. In an instant, she swung into attack, unleashing a burst that shredded the rival machine. It spiraled downward, flames trailing until it exploded against the rocks. The roar of triumph from the prisoners shook the cabin. They were witnessing more than escape. They were part of a legend being written in fire across the night sky. Sophia allowed herself a thin smile. She knew this was far from over. Enemy forces would soon mobilize entire battalions to chase them. But tonight, they had already won more than freedom. They had shattered the myth of their captors and vulnerability. With the prison engulfed in flames, Sophia banked toward the mountains. Her eyes scanned the ridges, calculating paths that would keep them below radar. She had to guide them to safety across treacherous terrain where valleys twisted and winds howled with unpredictable force. The helicopter trembled as it cut through turbulent air. Prisoners gripped their seats, faces pale, as the mountains loomed close. But Sophia was unflinching. She had trained all her life for moments when failure meant death, and she had never once surrendered to fear. As they soared deeper into the night, Robert leaned close, his voice rough, but filled with conviction. "You have given us back our honor." He said his words carried not only gratitude, but recognition. Sophia had taken them from despair to defiance. She had transformed captives into survivors, and survivors into fighters. The mountains stretched endlessly before them. Somewhere beyond the ridges lay friendly lines, safety, and perhaps rest. But Sophia knew the journey was far from finished. They had stolen freedom at a terrible cost, and the enemy would not allow their humiliation to stand. Retaliation would be swift and merciless. Yet she also knew something else the enemy had just learned to fear. The helicopter pressed on into the dark horizon, carrying 13 souls who refused to bow. The sky belonged to them now, and with every mile they flew, the legend of the Falcon grew stronger. The night sky stretched vast and merciless above the mountains, and though the flames of the prison still flickered far behind, Sophia knew the enemy would not let the humiliation rest. Already their radios carried desperate orders: reinforcements, summoned ground forces, mobilized patrols, scrambled to every ridge and valley. They would throw everything into recapturing the stolen helicopter and the 13 prisoners inside it. Inside the cabin, the men and women huddled together, their breaths ragged from adrenaline. Some stared at Sophia as if she were more than human, as if she were the spirit of freedom itself guiding them through the storms. Sergeant Robert Hayes crouched near the cockpit studying maps he had memorized during his years of training. He whispered to Sophia about possible routes toward the border, but both of them knew speed alone would not save them. The enemy knew these mountains better than any chart, and their helicopters would soon sweep the skies. Sophia kept her eyes fixed on the instruments. She flew low, hugging the valleys where radar beams had difficulty penetrating. Her every move was calculated to exploit terrain, masking dips and ridges that concealed them from detection. She knew that fuel was limited, and every wrong turn could mean disaster. Her arm throbbed with pain from shrapnel wounds, but she clenched the controls tighter, refusing to yield. The Falcon could not falter. Hours passed with only the howl of wind and the steady roar of the rotor blades. Then the first pursuers appeared. The faint thrum of engines in the distance echoed across the peaks. Robert's eyes met Sophia's. He did not need to speak. She already knew. She dropped altitude, the helicopter skimming treetops, branches whipping past the cockpit. She guided the machine into a canyon narrow and twisting where the moonlight barely reached. Enemy searchlights swept the ridges above, but the Falcon stayed hidden beneath their gaze. The prisoners held their breath, every jolt rattling their bones. But Sophia remained calm, every muscle tuned to the rhythm of the aircraft. She had been trained for low-level flight since her earliest days, and now that training was the only shield they had. The enemy craft circled closer, their floodlights stabbing into the canyon walls. Gunfire cracked, echoing like thunder. Sophia banked hard, the helicopter tilting at a near impossible angle. Sparks flew where rounds scraped the fuselage. Prisoners cried out, gripping the sides. But Sophia's voice cut through the panic. Steady as stone, hold on, she commanded. We are not prey tonight. She darted through a narrow gorge where cliffs closed in like jaws. The pursuing helicopter followed, but its pilot misjudged the space. The sound of metal grinding against rocks split the night, and then a fireball blossomed behind them, illuminating the canyon in fierce orange light. The enemy bird fell in ruins. Its destruction bought them precious time. Robert shouted triumph, his fist raised, but Sophia only nodded. Her focus remained unbroken. This was only the beginning. More hunters would come. Their adversaries would not stop until every last prisoner was dead or chained again. As dawn approached, a gray light seeped across the peaks. The helicopter shuddered under fatigue, its fuel gauges sinking dangerously low. Sophia guided it onto a hidden plateau where the forest stretched wide and silent. She powered down the engines, letting the rotors slow to stillness. The sudden quiet felt deafening after hours of thunder. The prisoners stumbled out, their legs shaking. Some fell to their knees, touching the earth, as if to confirm they were alive. Robert scanned the horizon, wary of patrols. Sophia moved among them, checking wounds, distributing water from emergency supplies. Her own blood seeped through torn fabric, but she refused to rest. Her eyes never stopped scanning the sky, listening for the faintest hum of engines. In that fragile dawn, the weight of reality settled on them. They were not safe, yet they were deep behind enemy lines with limited food, a crippled helicopter, and soldiers hunting them with fury. Sophia gathered them into a circle. Her voice carried calm authority. She told them the truth. They could not simply hide. They must keep moving, and when the time was right, they must use the helicopter not only to flee but to strike again if cornered. The Falcon was more than transport. It was their shield there. So their only chance. Robert supported her words. He reminded the group that despair had nearly broken in the camp, but now they had turned fear into fire together. They had already achieved what no one believed possible. He told them that if they stood united, they could carve a path through any storm. The prisoners drew strength from his conviction and from the steady presence of Sophia. They began tending to one another, cleaning wounds, fashioning makeshift bandages from scraps. They spoke quietly about families they might see again, about homes they feared they would never reach. These conversations bound them together, giving shape to their hope. As the sun climbed higher, the mountains revealed their harsh beauty. Jagged cliffs rose like ancient guardians. Rivers cut deep scars through the valleys. The air grew thin and cold. Each sight reminded them of the scale of the challenge ahead. For Sophia, the landscape was more than beauty. It was a battlefield. She studied ridgelines, noting where radar might fail, where helicopters would struggle to maneuver. She turned geography into strategy as naturally as she breathed. By midday, their rest was broken. The distant hum returned, carried on mountain winds. Enemy helicopters were back. Sophia ordered everyone aboard within minutes. The Falcon roared to life, once more its blades slicing the air. She launched them skyward, hugging the terrain once again as enemy patrols swept the region. This time, there were 3 pursuing craft, their formation tight, their intent unmistakable. They meant to box her, and Sophia clenched her jaw. Her eyes darted across the ridges, calculating. She dropped suddenly into a river gorge. Water spraying upward in silver arcs. The enemy followed, closing the trap. Gunfire erupted, stones shattering into shards around them. The prisoners inside braced themselves, certain their luck had run out. But Sophia was not guided by luck. She was guided by mastery. She twisted the helicopter with impossible precision, weaving between cliffs. She forced the pursuers into tighter turns than they could handle. One clipped a ridge and spun into ruin. The others faltered, breaking formation for fear of the same fate. Sophia seized the opening. She pulled sharply upward, rising above the gorge, and unleashed a volley that ripped through the second craft. Flames burst in the sky, scattering wreckage across the mountains. The third helicopter veered away, retreating rather than facing the predator. It had been hunting the mountains, echoed with the roar of Sophia's victory. The Falcon still flew, and the legend grew stronger. Yet fuel was running low, supplies dwindled. Every battle drained their strength. Sophia knew they could not sustain endless fights. They needed safe passage to friendly ground. And she also knew the enemy commander, Viktor Malenkov, would not forgive failure. He would come himself, if needed as pride demanded it. As night returned, Sophia guided the Falcon into a concealed valley where mist rolled heavy. She powered down again, instructing silence. The prisoners rested in uneasy sleep while she sat at the cockpit, her gaze fixed on the dark horizon. The hunt was not over, it had only begun. The mist curled across the valley like a living veil. When dawn broke again, the Falcon sat still in the clearing, its blades resting like wings folded after battle. Sophia remained awake, her back straight, her eyes sharp, while the others dozed. She had not allowed herself more than minutes of rest. Her thoughts never stopped turning. Each sunrise meant another day, closer to safety, but also another chance for the enemy to tighten their net. Robert stirred beside her, his face lined with fatigue, but his spirit unbroken. He studied the horizon with her. He knew what she knew, that Viktor Malenkov would not accept defeat. Quietly, a man like him thrived on control and humiliation of enemies. His reputation now hung by a thread. If he could not recapture Sophia and the others, he would lose the fear that sustained his command. By mid-morning, the sound came faint at first, then louder, the steady rhythm of engines. Malenkov had arrived. His forces spread across the mountains, ground troops sweeping valleys, while helicopters hovered above like hawks. Sophia felt it in her chest. The enemy commander himself had entered the hunt, determined to reclaim his pride by crushing those who had defied him. The prisoners readied themselves, their bodies weak from wounds and exhaustion, yet their spirits blazing stronger than ever. Robert armed them with captured rifles, blades, anything they had scavenged. They looked to Sophia, who stood at the cockpit, her figure framed by morning light, her voice steady. She told them this would be the last stand. They could run endlessly until fuel bled dry, or they could rise now, and in as she chose to rise, and they followed. The Falcon roared back to life, shaking the valley awake. Sophia guided the helicopter upward into the pale sky. The enemy moved instantly. Malenkov's command helicopter appeared across the ridge, larger, heavier, bristling with weapons. Its escorts flanked it, determined to surround the renegades. Sophia's grip tightened. She had fought battles against odds before, but never had so much rested on one clash. The air, filled with fire gunships, streaked across the sky, unleashing rounds that chewed through the trees. Sophia dove and twisted the Falcon through impossible angles, using every ridge and canyon to shield her movement. Her body ached, but her spirit was sharper than steel. She wove the machine as if it were an extension of her soul. Robert called out bearings, marking targets, directing fire. The prisoners inside became her crew, eyes and ears scanning the sky, shouting warnings. One man manned the captured gun, pouring fire toward enemy escorts. They were not trained aviators, but desperation forged them into warriors. The first escort fell to their combined fury. Smoke trailed across the sky as it spun downward to burst against the rocks. The second pressed harder, driving Sophia into a narrow gorge. Malenkov followed, above, his voice barking orders through the radio waves, his tone filled with rage. He called Sophia nothing more than a thief, a shadow unworthy of defiance. But his words carried no weight against her silence. Her actions were her answer. She guided the Falcon, low, skimming the water of a mountain river. Spray streaked across the cockpit. The escort behind her locked weapons, firing again and again. But Sophia timed her climb perfectly. The enemy round struck the cliffs instead, triggering an avalanche of stone that crushed the pursuing craft in thunderous ruin. The mountains themselves had become her ally. Only Malenkov remained. His helicopter loomed powerful, its arsenal intact. He descended into the gorge to finish the fight. His voice filled the airwaves with threats, promises of torment. If they surrendered, Robert shouted back, defiance, reminding him that his prison had already burned. Malenkov snarled and unleashed everything his helicopter carried. Missiles streaked through the gorge, fire chasing the Falcon. Sophia clenched her teeth and dove beneath the barrage, twisting through the canyon tighter than any sane pilot would dare. The Falcon rattled, shuddered, but obeyed her while prisoners cried out, gripping whatever they could. The missiles screamed past, exploding against cliffs in violent fireballs. She rose again through smoke into Malenkov's blind side. Her fingers danced across the unfamiliar controls, unleashing a final storm of rockets. The enemy commander's helicopter shuddered, struck by precision. Fire flames burst from its engines. It spiraled uncontrollably. Malenkov's last screams vanishing in static before the craft slammed into the cliffs, erupting in an inferno that lit the gorge brighter than the sun. The echo rolled for miles. The hunt was over. Silence fell, broken only by the heavy breaths of the survivors. The Falcon hovered steady above the smoking wreckage. Sophia's eyes hardened, then softened. The enemy who had sought to break her spirit was gone, and with him the shadow that had loomed over them for weeks. She guided the helicopter upward into the open sky, the horizon stretching wide and clear. Hours later, they crossed into friendly lines. Exhausted voices cheered as radio operators confirmed their identity. Disbelief crackling through the speakers. Sophia reported calmly 13 rescued prisoners, 1 captured aircraft. Enemy prison destroyed, commander eliminated. She spoke the facts with no flourish, though every word carried the weight of legend. When they landed at the forward base, soldiers rushed to greet them, faces filled with awe. They had heard fragments of the story over the airwaves, but now they saw it with their own eyes. The Falcon returning from the jaws of death with warriors who had refused to bow. Sophia stepped on a solid ground. Her legs trembled, but her spirit soared. Robert clasped her hand, his voice hoarse with gratitude. You gave us back more than freedom, he told her. You gave us back our honor. Months later, the story spread through every corner of the military. It became more than an escape. It became a testament to resilience and defiance. Sophia was honored, promoted, celebrated. Yet what mattered more to her was the truth her actions carried, that a pilot was never just a prisoner, that even in the darkest cage the mind and spirit could turn captivity into victory. She began training young aviators in survival and resistance, teaching them that knowledge was their greatest weapon, that any aircraft could be mastered if the pilot believed that captivity was not the end, but another battlefield to be conquered. Her students listened wide-eyed, learning that the most dangerous mistake an enemy could make was to underestimate those who refused to surrender. Sophia's story was told in whispers and in song. Soldiers called her the Falcon, who rose from chains to strike the sky. She herself never sought glory. She remembered only the faces of those who had trusted her in that desperate hour, the roar of the helicopter carrying them toward freedom and the fire of the prison crumbling behind them. The mountains would always remember the thunder of that night. The enemy would always remember the shame of their defeat, and the world would always remember that one woman turned captivity into legend.